Someone asked if I would make a video about how I do my recovery practices without using a sponsor. So this blows a lot of people's minds that I don't use a sponsor. I have not used a sponsor in almost 4 years. And in fact, I did use one. The last time I went through a 12-step program, I say the last time because I was in and out of those rooms for over a decade. But the last time I went through, I did use a sponsor. I actually used 4 different sponsors over the course of 18 months. Now, each time I chose one, I thought I was finding a partner for life. I thought I'd use a sponsor until the day that I died. I was pretty sure that's how that was supposed to work. But one by one, their circumstances changed and each one dropped me. It was only the last sponsor I had, actually. I was the one who dropped her because at that point I was like, yeah, I got this pretty well dialed in with God. I'm pretty sure, and I have this, and He's the only sponsor I need. And I was right, because here I am almost 4 years later, and it's going great. So in the beginning, I'll tell you, as I was using a sponsor, what did I get out of it? I do feel like there was a lot of value that I got over having the accountability partner. And if somebody asked me today if they were just going into recovery, I would suggest find an accountability partner, someone who could keep you accountable for doing the work you have committed to do. You don't really need another human to manage that or to dictate that or to direct that, because really the work you are doing, at least within a 12-step program, you should be doing that work exclusively with God. And by that, I mean the steps are designed to be opportunities for you to close the gap between you and your higher power, and then to be able to use the benefits that come from that to then close the gap between you and other people. You're making amends. You're trying to be someone who is trustworthy, someone who isn't leading out with resentments and fears and causing pain and doing damage in relationships. You're leading out as someone who's honest and trustworthy. That's the point of working a 12-step program. And you get the ability to do that and to present yourself that way and move through your life that way as you get closer and closer to a higher power that is there to help you do that. And so that is the purpose of working at least a 12-step program. And for me, I'm now outside of a 12-step program. I've past that, but it's still, the practices that I work every day, I'm doing that between me and God. It's a very intimate space that I share with God. So the sponsors that I did use, at least they were there to help me to establish that accountability of, hey, have you done the work today? Now, a lot of times we see sponsors kind of stand in the way of the higher power in terms of, you report to me, you tell me, you explain to me, you describe to me, you disclose to me, you confess to me, those kinds of things. But those really that's God's job, that's God's role. And so even though I do feel like there were many instances where they were standing in the place of God trying to direct me, I was always told that you show your complete and utter surrender to God by completely and utterly surrendering to your sponsor. You show your willingness to do whatever God wants you to do by showing your willingness to do whatever your sponsor wants to do, and that they were the same thing, that you show one by doing the other. And so a lot of times it was a situation where I did show that willingness by being willing to do what sponsors told me to do. And I was required every day to send multiple texts in several different situations, and definitely at night before I went to bed, kind of to do a review of my day and answer for things I had done or not done. And that did at least help me to establish the habit of doing what I understood to be recovery work and recovery steps every day. Now, where things really started to change for me in my progress, though, was when I recognized, these are questions that I'm answering. My sponsors want me to report back on these things every day, but these are questions I should be asking God. Where am I fearful? If you ask me, my answer is going to be based on my limitations to see where I am fearful right now, where I am resentful, where I am, being influenced by dishonest thinking or selfish thinking. And the more that is happening, the more, if I knew all of those things, I'd be working to correct them for sure, but I don't always know. And so it's so imperative that I take that time to ask God so that He can show me. And so how do I do this without a sponsor? Well, I do this without a sponsor by exclusively doing this with God. And even though the sponsors were helpful in helping me to establish that accountability, they weren't helpful in helping me find recovery. It wasn't until I was able to realize and recognize that this was work I had to do with God. And then once I did, and I was getting that dialed in and finding recovery, I was becoming pretty agitated by how controlling my sponsor was being. And because she kept telling me, you're not doing this right, you're not doing this right, you're not doing it exactly like this, you're not doing it exactly like that. And I was like, well, whatever I'm doing must be working, because I'm on the other side of this thing. I feel completely neutral toward my, old addictive behaviors and compulsions. And so whatever I'm doing, like, I like it. It feels good. And so finally, I just realized, like, I'm in this relationship just to humor her. I'm in this relationship just to do what I think I'm supposed to do. But I'm okay. And as I went off on my own, not on my own at all, I will say, as I stepped exclusively into the care of my God and away from those who were trying to be the gatekeeper between me and God, I found new layers of recovery and new layers of understanding and new layers of practice that have completely transformed my life and my understanding. And there are still moments where I feel stuck, but those are not moments where I look at, okay, well, am I broken? Is recovery broken? Do I need a sponsor? Am I doing this wrong? No, I just realized, like, if I'm stuck, that just means this is my opportunity to dig a little deeper, to do my process in a different way so that I can unlock greater growth and greater meaning. So when I first stopped using a sponsor, here's how I did it. I kept doing the things I had created a habit of doing while I used a sponsor in terms of like the accountability. So what was I doing on a daily basis? Well, they were asking me to be mindful of where I was getting disturbed by resentment and fear, selfishness, dishonesty. Try to recognize that in the moment and then ask for help. And so, in the big book, the Alcoholics Anonymous book, it says, ask God to remove them at once. In the practice with a sponsor, though, I was asked to send a text to my sponsor and tell her, hey, I'm disturbed. Hey, here's what's happening. Here's what I'm contributing to the situation. And that often took the place of prayer. And I was asked every night to send a detailed accounting of, where have I been influenced by fear? Where have I been influenced by, selfishness, dishonesty, all that stuff. And again, I was asked to tell her, I was asked to do that. And it was in the big book, in the Alcoholics Anonymous book, it says that's a reflection that you have with God to kind of review that, but the way I was asked to do it was tell my sponsor. And so I did. I was in the habit of texting my sponsor several times a day when I was upset. I was in the habit of every night sending a message to my sponsor and telling her, kind of how things had gone during the day. And I was in a habit. I established a daily habit of doing that. And then once I realized, like, well, what in the heck? Like, I'm missing the steps here because I'm not asking God to take this. I'm just telling my sponsor that it's there. At the end of the day, I'm not asking God to help me to discover where I was being affected, with blindness that I didn't even know I had, recognize areas where I am being fearful in ways that I have learned to be in my life, and resentful in ways that I've learned to be in my life that are so second nature to me that I don't notice them. And so I'm not asking God about that. I'm telling somebody else, but my answers are based on my limitations. They're based on the limitation of what I can't see. And so I just turned those practices and I turned them toward heaven. Instead of using another person on the end of my phone, the other side of a phone number or an app, I turned them to heaven. And I had that dialed in. Like I said, I used the daily practice I'd gotten in the habit of doing between me and the sponsor, and I just said, instead of doing this with you, I'm going to do this with God. Well, actually, for a season, it was you and God, because I'd have those conversations with God, and then I would report to a sponsor. And then I just kept going from there. Now, I did use an app for a while after I stopped using a sponsor. There's an app that I found. It was a sponsor that referred it to me. It was called Spiritual Tools app. It's an AA app, I think, and it goes through the questions that you can ask of, they call one a spot check of just kind of check in and see when you're getting upset about something, what's going on. And then the other one is like, I think it's called a daily inventory or nightly checklist, something like that. And it goes through the list of questions you can kind of just go through and type in, kind of journaling it out and stuff. And my sponsor had given it to me because she was like, hey, you can use this to send me your stuff. Like, you fill in the answers and then send it to me. But after I stopped using a sponsor, I just used it for myself. I use it as kind of my prompts for two-way prayers, meaning there was an opportunity for me to ask God, talk to God, and pause and wait for an answer. A two-way prayer. It's a conversation. It's a dialogue. And his answers usually look like thoughts that come to my mind. So it's not like I'm hanging out with voices in my head necessarily. But I would just use those questions as the prompts that I would use in my prayer. And so I used that app for a while, but then it just turned into, as my fluency grew, I had to use the app less and less. And by that I mean that I would ask the questions in my mind, and answers would come so fast that they would come before I even wrote them down. And so I stopped using the app over time. Now, there have been moments in my life where life seems to pour faster than I can process, and that's just how it is. Our recovery tools always will be kind of like a funnel. Where we are in our recovery and in our growth will meet most of the demands that we have on our daily life, but sometimes life pours so fast, just like a funnel. If you're using it to pour milk into a bottle, great, but sometimes you can over pour, and then that milk will start to make a mess and it will splash over the sides of the funnel. And similarly, sometimes life still just pours really fast, seems to pour a little faster than I can process, and I will feel anxiety creeping back in, or maybe some of my old not cravings, but just that agitation, the itchiness that comes back into my appetite sometimes. And I know that life is pouring fast. And times like those, good examples, I just had a baby. I had a baby 6 months ago. And boy, there we go. He's making his debut right here. With a new baby, days are nights, nights are days. Everything is upside down, and time is relative. And what's going on? I don't know. Have I even showered? It's crazy. And so in these 6 months, there have been times that I've had to kind of, ask someone, hey, can you just be my accountability partner for a minute? Because I'm getting a little sloppy in my practices, and I can feel things changing, and I just need that accountability to make sure I'm keeping things dialed in. And so for a season after I had used that app, within the next year or two after that, when I would get to those itchy times, I would pull that app back up on my phone. I still have it on my phone. Been years probably since I've made an entry, but and I would just use it, for, a few days, a week, a month, whatever I felt like I needed before I was kind of back in the routine of doing it. And so, yeah, I have not slid backwards not using a sponsor. In fact, in many ways, I feel like I've been able to continue to progress in my recovery in ways that I probably would have been limited in doing had I used a sponsor. Similar, like just for example, when I just mentioned that it's been helpful to me to use an accountability partner at times when I feel like life is just overpouring. Recently, just in the last month, I had someone I had met, we had found recovery at similar times, had kind of similar histories in the program. We've stayed in touch over the last few years, and she reached out to me a few weeks ago. She's like, how's it going? How's your recovery? I gave her an update, and she's like, is there anything I can do for you? And I told her, sure. I was like, hey, do you mind just being someone I could, just stay accountable to for like 3 weeks, just as I'm adjusting to the new baby's routine and schedule. And I just want to check in with you and let you know I've done those 3 daily practices, between me and God, that I know keep me in tip-top shape, by the way. Tip-top. 3 simple practices. They take minutes. They're amazing. They're beautiful. They work miracles. If you want to know what they are, subscribe to my newsletter or reach out to me privately. I will give you resources. But anyway, so that's all I want. I just want someone I can just say, done those 3 things. That's it. And she said, sure. And within 24 hours, she suggested, oh, also, can you listen to this podcast? Oh, also, let's read this book together. Also, let's have a daily, a weekly call, 1 hour a week. And I was like, girlfriend, because she started to check up on me and be like, hey, have you started listening to the podcast? How's that podcast going? That's what she said. How's the podcast going I sent you? It was definitely the assumption that I was doing it. And I was like, oh, I haven't started it yet. A few days later, how's that podcast going? And I said, well, I haven't started it yet. And to be clear, this is not a failed commitment on my part. I haven't committed to listen to that. It looks good. I'm sure there's some value in it. I would like to listen to it at some point. But right now, I'm prioritizing other things, meaning those 3 things that I told her I was trying to prioritize as a new mom. And so she responded back and she was like, is there anything I can do for you beyond what you've decided you need? And I was like, okay, we need to stop doing this. That was a fun few days. But yeah, I think we're going to be good because I'm not looking for a sponsor, and this is getting some serious sponsor-sponsee vibes. I just needed an accountability partner, but you and I definitely come from different schools of thought here about where a sponsor serves and the necessity and the value of having one. And so let's just not do this because we're just going to continue to be building frustration between the two of us here. And so we stopped. I stopped, but that was the frustration for me, is that I was trying to just come back to those 3 simple daily things that I know keep my recovery tight, and peaceful. And she immediately was building it out with, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and that. And I'm like, girl, if I was anybody else, if I was a new mom coming into a program saying, I need help, and you were packing all that stuff onto me, I would have never even gotten to those 3 practices, because I would be so overwhelmed by everything you're asking me to do that I would just be like, well, I guess I don't have it in me. I can't do it. I don't have what it takes to recover. I don't have what it takes to find my way through this program. I don't have the time. I don't have the emotional or physical resources as a new mom to manage all of that. And so I feel grateful that I was able to outgrow my need for a sponsor so quickly. I feel like sponsors, maybe for a season, could be helpful. Maybe, like I said, I have big opinions about the whole dynamic of sponsorship, but I can't deny that I did benefit from the relationships I had. However, I must say, I have to put a little bit of clause there, a little asterisk. I did benefit, but I think it was because it was very God-directed. I was always prayerful before I chose a sponsor, all 4 times. And I feel like it was a very tightly directed relationship, that I was led to the person that God saw could bring me through the next experience and understanding I needed to find true recovery. Because the sponsors did not lead me to true recovery. They did give me some core experiences that increased my understanding and awareness of what I needed to do in order to truly recover. So, for example, my first sponsor was the first person who told me, I'm not looking over your shoulder to control what you're going to be doing within your addiction. I just want to talk to you about the steps and give you an understanding of them. Read the big book. Read the Alcoholics Anonymous book. And I was not in a fellowship for alcoholism, but that was the book that was being used in some groups within, my fellowship. And that's what I was directed to do, is read the big book. And I did for the first time. And that blew my mind. I was like, whoa, the stuff I'm finding here is not the stuff I'm finding in these 12-step programs that I've been going in and out of for 10 years. Like, what is this? This is new. This is beautiful and clear and so simple. And so that totally blew my mind and changed my approach to recovery entirely. Definitely started to give me the hope that, whoa, recovery can exist in a peaceful way, because this is telling stories of people who are on the other side of compulsive behaviors that were killing them. And they're peaceful and they're neutral towards alcohol. Like, what the heck? I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know you could be an addict who wasn't living with cravings for the rest of your life. So this idea of neutrality, that blew my mind. And then my next sponsor, she and I didn't last very long. She wasn't recovered. I don't think any of my sponsors were recovered, actually. That's another story. But we lasted for like 5 seconds. We had a really hard time scheduling. And like I said, I think she had relapsed and just was avoiding me, actually. But after that, my next sponsor I used for 6 months. And she taught me the grace of God, really, because I remember, like, even though she also was coming from this, big book mindset of, we're just going to talk about the steps here. I'm not going to control, and manage what you're doing with, like, addiction stuff. I just want to know, like, we're just going to talk about steps. I remember, though, I was like, I did this thing, though. I got to tell her what I did. And I was pretty sure I tell her I messed up and then she dumps me. I was pretty sure that's how the sponsor-sponsee relationship work. You're perfect until you're not, and then you get dumped or chastised or controlled or whatever. So I put my tail between my legs and I went to her and I was like, hey, I did this thing. And she responded by saying, it sounds like you need to spend a little more time with God today. What? That blew my mind. I was floored. I was like, what? Yeah. You know what? That sounds like the God that I've known and loved my whole life. A God who's going to give me grace and a God who's going to give me a second chance starting now. A God who's not going to show up and bully me and berate me and degrade me and tell me I better start back at the beginning because who am I? What have I done? I'm worthless, obviously. No, actually. I liked that. And so that changed my perspective and my understanding of what a sponsor-sponsee relationship could be, and also what my relationship really was with God, or what it was he wanted to do for me and how he wanted to show up for me. And then my next sponsor, ironically, taught me that I was using sponsors as my higher power, because when she dumped me, and she dumped me because she was like, oh, I'm just really struggling. And I really need more time to spend on my own program to tighten things up and, dial things in better with my own sponsor. I was devastated because for the 6 weeks that we worked together, I was doing pretty dang good and seeing some progress that I had not seen for, the year that I had been in program. And so I was excited. And then when she dumped me, I was like, oh, well, then I guess I can do whatever I want. And I fell off the bandwagon so hard. And in doing so, I realized, like, why am I doing this just because she's not watching me? Who is she? Why am I doing this if, like, God's still watching me? What the heck? What was that about? Oh my gosh, I've been using her as my higher power. That changed my mind. That blew my mind to realize what I was doing and what I had let this relationship become in my life. Then my final sponsor, that relationship, again, that was where I learned that I could outgrow this dynamic of needing a sponsor. She showed up in a way that was so down to earth and authentic, and I appreciated her willingness to give me room to move through and adapt my program to something that felt good. And then she kept changing her mind because her sponsor didn't approve. So when I would go to her and be like, I was thinking this, or I was feeling that, or here is my understanding and insight, she'd be like, that's amazing. Yeah, for sure. Do that, girl. Like, if that feels good, yeah, do that. I trust you. I trust God. And then minutes later, she'd be like, actually, I talked to my sponsor about it, and she said, so actually, no, you have to word it this way. You have to do it that way. You can't do it this way. And actually. And so it was really discouraging because I liked her, couldn't stand her sponsor. And I just kept thinking, if I wanted, like, I wouldn't have never chosen your sponsor off of a list. She sounds like a wretched woman. Yeah. And so I didn't like that she kept bringing her sponsor into our relationship. And then when I started to sponsor, both of them, ganged up on me and got super controlling. And at that point, I already was like, do I need to stay here? Do I need to continue to do this? Because my sponsor wasn't recovered, and it was obvious. And when I say she wasn't recovered, I don't know. I have no idea where her personal practices were in the scope of, like, her physical choices within her addiction. But the way she was showing up to control and to micromanage and to correct and to, like, all of these things, it was just like, you haven't found the thing that we're trying to find here. Also, I don't think she'd recovered within the scope of her addiction, but that's a whole nother story. So it just was like, I got to a point where I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm getting this, and she hasn't gotten it yet. And I don't mean that in a prideful way, but it was just like I said, she kept finding fault with what I was doing, little things that she was like, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right. You're not working program right. You're not doing it. I'm like, I had done something right because here I am. And it's so much more amazing than I ever imagined. It's so amazing. But she didn't care. All she cared about was how I was and wasn't doing things. And so I learned so much from each of those women. And when I look back, I realized it wasn't 4 different relationships. It was one long conversation that I was having with God. And I was prayerful the whole time and striving to do his will and to show up in my recovery as committed and deeply and as I could with that willingness. And I did everything I believed I was supposed to do in his name. So I wasn't committed to surrendering to my sponsor because I wanted to recover. I was, because I wanted to recover, but I was committed to showing my surrender and commitment to God. And it was my understanding that I had to do that by submitting to a sponsor. And so I did. And there were so many things I did. And there were so many things I was asked to do. There were so many things I was kept from doing. All of these things that didn't make sense and I wasn't comfortable doing, but I did them in the name of the Lord. Like, I was like, I believe this is what I'm supposed to do to recover. It got to a point where the things just didn't line up. It just was so confusing. One of them was like, hey, you're ready. You should start sponsoring. I'm like, remember that thing I told you I did? I don't think I'm ready to start sponsoring. I don't feel like I'm recovering. And I was like, nope. They said, nope, you gotta do it. You gotta sponsor in order to recover. But I'm like, well, you can't sponsor unless you're recovered. But you also have to sponsor in order to recover. Well, then how do you do that? Well, you show up and you tell people you're ready to sponsor. And then you can go forth and sponsor. And I'm like, well, how does that work in a program where you're supposed to be showing up and not being selfish and being honest? Because I feel like you're asking me to lie for selfish reasons. So I'm confused. So anyway, I did those things in the name of God, in the sense of like, I'm trying to do things based on my understanding here. And God knew that. And, and I can continue to try to work closely with him to understand and to receive and to gain whatever it was I was supposed to be getting out of the things I was doing that didn't make sense, that I didn't understand, that weren't comfortable. And with me showing up with that intention in his name, with him, always looking back over my shoulder, like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? You just let me know if I'm not. Like, you just give me those course corrections. He did continue to course correct me, and he did continue to do the work to gather me in. In Isaiah, it says the Lord gives line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. And I started with sponsors. God uses the tools that we're using. If that's where we are, that's where he'll speak to us. And I was using sponsors, and I was just asking him to meet me. He meets you where you are. That's where I was. So he met me where I was, and he continued to continue that dialogue with me until it just became more and more intimate and closer and closer to being between him and me, with nobody else contributing. And it was so beautiful. I've loved not having a sponsor. Let me say it a different way. I have loved this journey with God. I've loved it. And it's been a 5-year journey now. I did my first 3 steps January 15th, 2021 with that sponsor that I told you about, the one who introduced me to the big book. I wrote it inside of my big book, January 15th, 2021. And so it's been 5 years since I started this final attempt to recover. 4 years, almost 4 years. In April or May, it will be 4 years since I have used a sponsor and let go of my sponsor. But this journey that I started with God, it's been magnificent. I love it. And there are different tools I've used along the way. There are different people who have crossed my path. There's been mistakes, and there's been holes, and there's been pits, and there's been growth, and there's been miracles. So many miracles. And I've loved it. And I think the sponsors that I used were great training wheels. I think the meetings I used to go to were great training wheels. I think all of those tools and resources that I received early on, in the 12-step program, those were tools that ended up being great training wheels. None that I would ever canonize and say, you have to do this. Really, it's just about finding God and getting close to God and dialing that in and using that power to then get close to and maintain peace with other people in your life. And so, and well, that sounds a little familiar, right? There's a book I read once that talks about that. Two great commandments. But it's like when you do that, you'll see that you don't need a sponsor. Maybe you never did. And I'm not trying to talk anyone out of using a sponsor. I don't know where you are in your season of recovery, and I don't know what tools you're using. But I would encourage you to just be open to the fact that tools can be temporary, and they can make great training wheels. But they are something that you move through and use, sometimes just for a season, as you progress and get where you are. You know, I often think about Dumbo. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. Anybody who was born before 2000 knows, but anybody born after, maybe you don't. But Dumbo, you know, the elephant, that he could fly only if he was using that feather. You know, he had to use that feather in order to fly. And then he lost the feather once and realized, oh, that was a trick. You don't need the feather. He was able to fly without it. And so I think sometimes when we're moving through recovery, we hang on to these tools, like those feathers. And then when we let go of them for whatever reason, we realize you could have done it all along. Not you alone, but you and God. Like, yeah, he's just so great. So, yeah, I don't know if I ever answered the question of how do I move this on a daily basis. No, I guess I did, because I just said I just continued the practice I established with my sponsors, that daily habit of doing those 3 things. 2 at the time, now 3. And now I just do them between me and God. And they're beautiful. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that answers the question. I hope it wasn't too rambly at this late hour. And if you want to get more information about these things, like I said, feel free to reach out to me privately, or you can sign up for my newsletter at liberatedbylight.com. And talk to you soon.